Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Brian Elliott. I am the executive in residence at Charter. Charter is a future of work media and research organization that brings together people leaders, researchers, experts, and a host of other people to talk about the most pressing issues facing teams and people today. I'm also the CEO of Work Forward and a longtime tech industry executive. Thrilled to be here today with three amazing experts. Laura Adams, Chief Human Resource Officer at JLL. They just put out some really interesting and very cool research yesterday that we'll get into over the course of the day today. Debbie Lovich, Senior Partner at BCG and author of the upcoming bestseller, Make Work Work. I'm just going to plug it that way. And Iain
Love
Roberts, until very recently, the Chief People Officer at Airbnb and also the former COO of IDEO, who's got some great design-led thinking, as well as insights on like the changing nature of leadership and how he's changed and morphed his own career too. Look, if you dial your head back to 2024, 2025, the conversation on AI was primarily a tech-led conversation. It was a heck of a lot of focus on what can the tools do, how fast can we deploy them, what's the CIO's role in this, how's the CTO pushing it forward. Basically, at the end of 2025, that shifted almost 180 degrees in a lot of firms and organizations. It went from being a tech-led to a people-centric conversation because change management turns out to be the essential ingredient. How do you actually get people through this? And nobody's more central to that conversation than the HR function in terms of driving this forward. In this session, we're going to talk about how leaders are actually approaching the redesigning work, what's working, what's not. We're going to get into Debbie's research at BCG about employee joy and how that factors into this. We'll get into Laura and Iain's experiences in leading at Airbnb and JLL and reshaping this too. I'm going to kick us off with a question. But please, as we go forward, use the chat. We will drop things in there. There is a Q&A function, I believe, as well, buried in here someplace. But the Charter team and I will stay on top of the chat and pull your questions in as we go forward. Let's start off with like, where are we today? There is a lot of conversation. We'll get into the headcount side of things next and what's happening with jobs. But just in terms of work transformation, I think it's proven a heck of a lot more challenging than most people expected. The studies that I read on a consistent basis, including out of BCG, say that there's like usually like a mid-single digit number, literally 4, 5, or 6%, depending on whose study I read, of firms that are getting positive, consistent return on investment out of their AI investments. Look, it's early days, and I'll stipulate that. But Debbie, what are you seeing in that data about what actually is working and what's not?
Yeah, I just reposted something today. A former colleague of mine who's CEO of Sky, Devesh Raj, just put out on LinkedIn a post about the 7 things you need to do to get the most out of your AI spend, pointing to the same statistic that you are, that nobody's getting a lot out of it. And the 7 things he put out there were all tech oriented. They're all about getting the tech and the product right. And so my reply was yes, 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 but you're missing number 8. And I think the 16%, or however you measure it, who are getting value at, start with number 8. And what is number 8? Number 8 is being employee centric, or what I say, being radically employee centric. And what does that look like? It doesn't look like saying we're doing AI for productivity. Because if you say we're doing AI for productivity, it's dead on arrival. Who's going to want to engage with that? Like, let me use the tool and you'll fire me, or better yet, keep me, but give me no resource to do my job better. It's how you talk about it. It's involving people from the beginning. Employees, they used to at Amazon have an empty seat at every table for who the customer is, right? Famously, to have the customer in the room. You should have a full seat at every table with the employee who AI is going to impact at the very beginning to help design it in an employee centric manner. And which means that the goal of AI has to be what's in it for employees, shareholders, and customers. So more joy, less toil for employees, more productivity for shareholders. I'm not saying you shouldn't get it, but it could be an outcome or a side goal. And then
Mhm.
also more delight for customers. And those 3 need to be equal. And 90% of the places are getting it wrong.
Fantastic. Great answer. Laura, you're at the center of this at JLL. And you were nodding your head kind of viciously when I said it's changing from a tech issue to an HR issue and a human issue. What are you guys doing and how are you driving it forward?
Yeah, we're doing a little bit of what Debbie mentioned around sort of making sure that the employee is front and center. So we're starting with really how are you re-engineering work altogether and starting with it from a process perspective. And the lens we do try to look at is where can technology really ease the work? Where do you need the human involvement as a part of it? And probably the best example that we've gotten the furthest in the organization is actually within our HR team. So our recruiting team actually developed a tool we call Hire Buddy, which connects all of the technology and software that we have and essentially does the end-to-end recruiting, but brings in people at the right point. So everything from how is it sourcing the talent to how do we schedule, which used to take recruiters 3 days and was like their biggest pain point, now to 15 minutes, all the way to the end of delivering the offer letter to the candidate. And we really found exactly what Debbie said. We included the recruiting team in helping us design this from an end to end, understanding what was the work that was bogging them down. And then now we've taken that from what was a 45-day process to now, in some cases, we can fill those roles in 10 days or less. And so for high volume recruiting, it's actually a tool that works out really, really well. And then the domino effect that happened for us was it allowed those recruiters then to either take one of two roles where they become more of a strategist to the hiring manager and they can absorb a higher volume, so do more productivity of recs, or we moved them into executive level recruiting. And interestingly enough, much of our recruiters, we sort of saw the Javin effect because much of our recruiters started getting poached
Hmm.
because the demand for those
Yeah,
skills were so
interesting.
much greater.
Interesting.
So
That's wild to see. The Jevons paradox that Laura is referencing is when something becomes cheaper because it can become more efficient, like those recruiters did, suddenly other people want more of them, especially executive recruiters, especially people who are
Yeah.
targeting specific areas. Iain, I know you've lived through that specific experience too in terms of what you're doing. Airbnb also as a tech company, you and I both sit here in the Bay Area,
Mhm.
faces the challenge of like how do you shift? You know, you've got all these AI native companies sprouting out. How do you make that shift happen? But love your thoughts.
I mean, I think there's two ideas here, like building off of both Debbie and Laura's points. Like the first is if we're only efficiency seeking, then that's not the most interesting thing that we can do, right? I think actually thinking about like the 10 times outcomes that we can create in value creation using AI is a thing I want to come back to in a minute, right? But on the efficiency seeking side of things, very similar. Like at the end of the day, if you're not redesigning the work and the organization around the work, I don't know what you're doing. And if you're going to go do that, then you need to be able to describe who's the customer for my work and what are their problems and how we're going to solve them. And that begins to look remarkably like a product-led organization. Even if it's in HR or finance or legal, you acknowledge you have customers, they have problems, you're trying to solve them. Some of those customers are candidates, some of them are hiring managers, some of them are internal. But when you can describe those problems, then you can actually like start to radically improve the process by which you do your work and you deliver value to your customers. That for me is how we need to do the efficiency seeking. For me, it's the AI enablement, AI adoption work, right? Where
Yeah,
we make companies better at what they're doing today.
yeah,
Then I think we get to this place about AI. When I hear AI native, I both cringe and I lean forward, right? Because for
right.
me, AI native only exists when an organization can only uniquely create its value because AI is embedded into what they do and how they create value.
Yeah,
And I think that's the interesting thing where we're going to see organizations that really lean into that create new moats for themselves. And those that don't actually acknowledge that the competitive set's going to radically change
yeah,
over the next 5 years, and it's going to put them in a really interesting situation from a top line growth perspective.
yeah. No, it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds. You've all
Brian?
sort of go for it, Debbie.
Yeah, yeah. Can I build on that and maybe challenge something you said in the intro? No offense, Lauren. Laura and I just met, so I'm hoping not to offend you. But in the intro, you said, right, like it's redesigning work and it's a people issue, and that's where CHROs come in. But I think that the fact that people abdicate responsibility for employees' experience to HR prevents, Iain, what you're saying happening. If the customer, our
Yeah.
employee, who choose and the product is work that happens between 9 to 5, 7 to 7, whatever the workday is, then the product that they have to redesign with AI is what happens during the day. HR has no access to that and has no resources or budget to change that, right? So Laura, you could, and our HR friends can make everything that HR touches better, right? You can make recruiting better and onboarding better and how to do performance management better. But those are low frequency interactions with employees. And so if you want to make the work better, and we could talk about that later, then it's actually not HR. We need the leader to do, Ian, what you were saying.
Yeah.
And this is where I was maybe in a bit of a privileged situation at Airbnb, but I think it links to what modern people leaders need to be able to do, right?
Yeah.
It's the HR side of it is very important. It's the thing that allows an organization to function, let's be honest, right? But if the modern people leader isn't leaning into the operating model transformation of the organization,
Yeah.
then I think we're missing the point, because at the end of the day, so many of our organizations today are people and systems, and that's the ball game, right? If you get the people and the systems to work well together. And so I think that we're in this reinvention moment of the modern people leader, where it is everything that HR has already done, and it's the operating model transformation that fundamentally changes how work happens. Now, that's challenging in and of itself, because every leader, every functional leader in an organization thinks that they understand how to do their work the best. And actually, I think the modern people leader needs to be able to see the ecosystem of the work in the organization and re-architect that.
Laura, we're going to give you a space here. I've got some thoughts on this one.
Debbie, I don't disagree with you. I think I actually 100% agree that leading transformations of this kind of size and scale and what we're going through, I don't think you can rely solely on HR or a transformation office. I think it has to start with leadership and the buy-in. I just think your point of what you made earlier is, let's not forget the employee and include the employee in how we're redesigning is so important to the success. At least that's what we're finding here.
Yeah.
Yeah. It
And
sounds
Laura,
like,
and,
right.
and Debbie, broadly speaking, I think everybody would agree, like from an HR perspective, too often leaders do abdicate to HR on jobs that honestly, as a former CEO and business leader, like I would never have abdicated in the way that I've seen other people do it, the responsibility for my talent agenda, right? For building and generating strong teams. Laura, you've also got an interesting position because I think you also are in charge of JLL's business in China. So one of the things that you guys have done structurally may be worth talking about is you think about like how do executives around the table also have business responsibility regardless of what your functional responsibility is. How has that played into how you think about this?
Yeah, I think the CHRO role has changed so much in the last 5 years since COVID. I mean, it's ridiculous. I think it changed more in the last 5 than it has probably in the last 20. And I think when I talk about it, I think you are first and foremost a business leader now. So it isn't, yes, I may have an expertise in HR, but it's more about a business leader. And to your point, my role, yes, I have HR as a function I have an accountability for and is my primacy. I also have real estate, our own portfolio real estate is under my remit. And then the third, as you said, is we took our top 10 countries, and every executive board member took a country and said, you're the business leader for that. So the CEOs of China report into me. And what it helped for me is staying connected to the business and the business problems and challenges that only make me more effective as a business leader. You know, I'm certain to get there twice a year. I try to do what I can to stay very close to the leadership teams there. But it's been hugely helpful for me in my role.
I love that as a really practical way to do it. Iain, you switched over from being COO at IDEO to being a CHRO. Hadn't led HR before ever in your life. What did you bring and what did you have to learn?
What do I bring? A tremendous amount of imposter syndrome for the first 6 months about what the hell am I doing? But thank you to my old team who definitely like brought me along and kept me on the straight and narrow. But I mean, I think what I brought was a systems thinking, creative problem solving approach. I'm trying not to use the terms design thinking, right? Because I think they're tired, but like a systems thinking and creative problem solving approach, like how we design ourselves and how we design our work. Everything that I'd learned to do over the prior, 20 years of my career was first principles thinking. No playbook. I didn't walk into Airbnb with a single playbook that said we're going to go from here to here. And here's all the best practices I knew. We had to like literally bring things back to first principles of like, again, who's the customer, what's the problem we're solving, what are the highest value things that we should invest in. One of the things that we invested in when I joined was we built a service blueprint for the entire function. And we acknowledged that there were too many things that we were trying to deliver. And actually too many things that we were trying to deliver in a world-class way. So we got more choiceful about the things that actually truly differentiated us in the talent marketplace versus those that we could outsource or slow down on. So I think I brought a lot of that kind of like product-centric, design-centric and systems thinking. What I had to learn was an entirely new craft. And frankly, for the first 6 to 12 months, absolutely, I felt like I was behind. And I was working with incredibly skilled practitioners who just had this ability to navigate an organization, hold tension in an organization, create an environment for change to happen in an organization that was a huge superpower. And we needed to lean into and you know, I feel like I've become a better leader as a result of being able to work with those people over the last 3 years.
So Debbie, both Iain and Laura have described the changing nature of like what HR leadership requires, right? It's the shift to systems thinking. It's a much heavier focus on organizational design. It's like a base level requirement these days of understanding business drivers and how business works in the first place, the ability to tie back any given program to outcomes. What are you seeing in terms of how HR itself is transforming or what the gaps are?
First of all, I love, Laura, what you described of like having a leader own a region. Like that dual hat of business and function is gorgeous. And I haven't seen that in other places. And so maybe I've had my head down. But I think that's amazing, right? I mean, HR, right? Like it sounds like you're doing it, Laura. HR needs to redesign itself before it can coach the rest of the organization to redesign. And so I love what you did about, okay, we're going to be AI first in HR. So we're going to think about, the recruiting process with the employees who do the recruiting. And then you can speak to the rest of the organization about here's how we reimagined work. And you're not just showing technically what you did, but also you can role model the employee centricity that I think is so lacking, right? You could say, instead of saying, okay, there's a little team off to the side that's rewiring how HR works, and then we're going to implement it and move people's jobs and lay people off, or probably not lay people off because you were too small to begin with anyhow, because you don't get enough people, but you give the tools to the employees and in HR and say, okay, we know what we need to do. We know what great looks like. Let's learn what these tools are capable of. And then let's step back and redesign work. That's a very employee centric way of redesigning HR using technology. And then you can, as HR, help the rest of the people in the organization by leading through example of what great looks like, as opposed to them offloading to you to do for them.
It is
Okay.
exactly what I said to my team, which is we can't architect the transformation of this organization, which is going to come to us, right or wrong. We're going to play a significant role, largely, Iain, to what you said. We have a unique role in how we operate across and what we can deliver in a way that may be undervalued. But we couldn't do it unless we could do it to ourselves first. And that's why we've been on an accelerated path to do that. It's not perfect, but it's getting there.
So Debbie broke the ice on the word layoff. So JLL's research yesterday was actually really interesting. One of the things that I loved about it was the number on 61% of the 2,200 C-suite executives polled said they actually expect their net employment to grow, not shrink, over the next 3 to 5 years, in part driven by AI, so the kind of growth-oriented side of life. Even within that, though, there's a lot of churn happening in different places. And so, Laura, I'd love to get your take first, and then Iain, come to you on how are you handling that churn? Because you kind of gave the example with recruiters, but more broadly, how are you guys approaching this in terms of the shift of roles and skills and what you need?
Yeah. And it's interesting because the anxiety is a reality. I mean, you're out there, and I think it was Challenger Gray that announced recently that AI is the largest attribute to layoffs, at least from what they're seeing, that it's attributing for 40% or more of the layoffs that are occurring, that's what's being cited. So I think the nervousness of employees is real. we recently launched our enterprise business strategy, and one of the key imperatives was around our people strategy. And we started with the question of how do we actually stay human centric in a world that is being pushed more and more from technology? And for us, it was how do you actually get ahead of this? And so we have built in the strategy and now a tool that we call a workforce modeler tool that is starting to predict the impact of AI based on the technology roadmap that we'll put in place of what will change about my role and what will go away,
Right.
to then give us a sense of what are the future skills that we need, and then how are we going to invest in training and upskilling the workforce. Now, will we be able to redeploy everybody? No, but we took a position that our employees are a huge asset. They add a lot of value. They're aligned to our culture and our values, and we want to do the best we can to retain them and equip them with the skills that they'll need in the future. So we're on that journey. I think that the interesting part about it is we're facing, and it was also cited in our report out, which was around the gap as being of skills as being one of the biggest issues now that organizations are facing. And that's true, which is why we said let's invest in how do we get people the right skills for the future.
Great answer. Iain, thoughts? What was
Yeah.
your approach at Airbnb and what have you seen working?
I mean, companies that are making those choices have got their own reasons, and I'm not going to opine upon because I think that everyone's got a slightly different reason set for why they're doing it, whether or not any of it is to do with seeing efficiencies through AI or believing that efficiencies will come through AI, kind of like moot point for another day, right? What I think is inevitable is that the work changes, right? How we
Yeah.
are transferring skills, how we are extending capability, the new capabilities that need to be built, the capacity of a team, all those things are going into a melting pot and changing, right? So my experience of going through this is that the scale of the organization is less important than the makeup of the skills and capabilities within it at this moment in time. I think there's a great example going on a slight tangent here. Like, I think about 2 months ago, the COO of Uber was famously quoted as saying, "We burned through our token usage, our full year budget token usage in the first 4 months."
Yeah.
Then there was a great article yesterday from Praveen, the CTO at Uber, talking about how they've started to actually take engineering product-led teams to focus on the work of the organization to create actually advancements in how the work is and how the work happens. I think it's a brilliant example, right, of actually turning the capacity of organization in on itself to reinvent work. I would argue you need more than forward deployed engineers. I've talked about in the past this idea of needing embedded organizational architects to reinvent the work as well as do the engineering to support it. But I think what that begins to shift or to signal is that the makeup of an organization is going to be different in the next 5 years. That the makeup of a people organization might traditionally have been program managers and recruiters and HRBPs, but we're going to have more analytics engineers. We're going to have more product managers. We're going to have more data like people. We're going to have different skill sets inside the organization or inside the function over time. And so I think the right leaders are thinking about how they transform the capability of their teams, partly through training, partly through hiring for sure, for me as well, from doing early stage career recruiting as well. I think the BS that's happening around like that, we're not going to see early stage recruiting is nonsense. From my prior life at IDEO, the most exciting people that always broke through the capability boundary were the people we hired straight out of school, who didn't have a model that they were trying to fit. They just knew the skills that they had and they didn't know what pigeonhole they fitted into. And frankly, that's the beauty of hiring early stage career. I think you find that new talent that is incredibly entrepreneurial that's going to reinvent what's possible inside of our roles.
Yeah. Laura, is JLL still, I'm assuming you guys are still hiring early career employees, but tell us what's going on there for you all.
We are still hiring early careers and we will continue. And part of the executive board has come and said we need a complete strategy around this. So we're still working on defining it, but it is a commitment, like you said, Iain. I think that fresh ideas and especially this early group of early careers that are much more fluent in AI than some of us who've been around for a while will be a real benefit to us. And we just really have to think very smartly about how do we actually harness that and bring that in. I also think you're going to see, to Iain's point, you're going to be able to bring in people at a different level and a different capability than having to go through some of the way in which entry level learned. And so I think we have to think really carefully about their capabilities and what you're bringing them in to do, which is why we're investing the time to sort of think through that. But yeah, early careers remains a priority for us.
An old idea that we had at IDEO, just to kind of like build on this, is like reverse mentorship. We would
Yes.
always do this. Our most senior people would have a reverse mentorship relationship with our most junior people at IDEO, and they would be learning as much as they were teaching. And I think we need more of that right now.
Yeah,
And
I
I agree.
100% agree. I mean, in the a book that I've written that's coming out, I write about my reverse mentor that taught me how to use AI. This woman, Anjali Agarwal, she was a Northeastern co-op student. Okay,
Mhm.
like someone who does a rotation during her college years. She taught me how to make my own Debbie, right? It's key. It's how we're going to learn, and we need to be not so proud that the people that we're going to learn the most from are these junior people. We just had a partner meeting. Okay, BCG's grown so much, 2,300 partners. We did math in San Francisco. We did mass senior partner upskilling. We literally sat around tables with junior employees teaching us how to make real agents to
Love that.
reinvent our own workflow. It was hilarious. This ballroom full of like junior people teaching us how to do it. I think I like 5,000%, Iain.
I've
Yeah.
talked with so many tech firms where there was a semi-capricious decision made 2 years ago to freeze all junior level hiring because we won't need them any longer. That about a year plus later, senior leaders went, I think I got it exactly wrong.
Always.
That sort of fresh talent is always, always, always a big deal in this stuff. Iain, you've talked about, actually, let me go back to another question just around the whole talent and how people are reacting side of things, which is the upgrading and the skills and talent side really is important in giving people that pathway, Laura, that you were describing. Debbie, there's some of the BCG research too that says that people are actually still they get really hit by identity loss and identity threat, right? And I've seen this as like senior engineers go through this wave of like the thing that I spent decades learning how to be really expert in, all of a sudden a majority of my day-to-day work on that is being taken over by this thing that has a depth of expertise. And maybe initially they dismissed it, but they kept trying it and realized over time it was coming at them. What are you seeing and how are you helping and thinking about how to help people through that sort of real emotional challenge?
Yeah, well, I think it's just another facet of what I mean by employee centricity, right? It's that if you think about employees as customers and work the product, guess what? Customers are not monolithic, right? Like we have different attitudinal segments. And you talk to companies, when I talk to a lot of companies, like you have to segment your employees just like you segment your customers. And like, yeah, we do. But how do they segment them? By gender, by race, by age, by marital status, by caregiver or not. No, that's not how people buy coffee, right? Like when you go to a coffee shop, there are people who want the mobile order really quick, and that's one product offering, right? You have people who want it to be a WeWork, they have other needs. You have people who want it to be a place to go and talk with friends, right? Okay. And so we have to shape the coffee shop to meet the needs of three different segments. For
Yeah.
example, when it comes to employees and what we need out of work, like I always say, solve for employee joy. You want more joy and less toil. But we have to remember one person's toil is another person's joy.
Yeah.
And it gets back to your identity thing because people's identity are different, right? And like you could have segments of hyper users, and when you dig in and understand why they're using AI so much, like they just have different attitudes than their peers. So when we were rolling out like really simple calendaring AI tools to our administrative staff, a lot of their job is calendaring, right? We had a segment, we called them launchers. These were like 50% of our EAs, our executive assistants. They took the job to launch into a different role at BCG. So they gobbled up any AI tool because it'll help them apply for another job at BCG. We had 40% that what we called lifers, like they want to be an EA forever. They like being the magician behind the curtain. And for them, calendaring is mastery. They pride themselves on wanting to land the meeting. They would not touch that tool with a 10-foot pole. And so we had to go deeper and say, well, is there any part of the calendaring that you hate? Well, it turns out they hated checking schedule availability. Okay, we could use the AI for that, but when it comes to the game they love, the Tetris game of landing the meeting that makes them feel like a hero, we turn that functionality off and we let them do that their way, and they probably do it better than the AI does it. And at some point, someone has to teach the AI, so it's good that we have this segment doing it for real. So we again, back to the employee's customer and works the product, you have to understand the attitudes. And I bet you have engineers that love diving in because they could get to advance, and you have those who are hesitant. So you need to, okay, let's try it for the pieces you hate first. You need to walk them there slowly. But it's
Ian,
a
I saw you
lot.
nodding. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're picking on a really interesting issue, Brian, that are around people have built careers, they built their livelihood around their knowledge and their skills and their ability to do a thing.
Yeah.
And there's tremendous virtue in that. At the same time, I think to really break through using this technology, and you and I have chatted about this before, we need organizations to become legible. And legibility means writing down the things, writing down the knowledge, freely sharing it with your coworkers, freely sharing it with your collaborators so that they can gain the benefit of your decades worth of experience without you being in the room.
Yeah.
Right. And that's really hard for some people to grok. It's really hard for some people to get comfortable with. I've found the lifelong learners, the growth mindset people really lean into it in the way that Debbie's talking about. And I think it's a conscious choice then for organizations to say, what do we do with the rest? What do we do with the people that are not wanting to lean in? Because the organization will only get fitter, and I use that term kind of broadly, if we make it legible. And if we make it legible, organizations are going to be able to do things they've never been able to do before, and create huge competitive advantage.
There's an interesting combo pack across this because I've seen the sort of adventure people go on individually, which is you can take generally senior engineers over time, they come around, right? Debbie, it's the someone who has broader aspirations journey you were talking about with EAs, right? Because they as they gravitate more and more into it, they realize that their value added was never the act of actually writing the code. It was actually the thought process that goes into systems integration and scalability and security and interfacing with their product managers and all the rest of the things that they were actually had experience around and depth around, not just the act of writing code. But Ian, you're opening up a different set of issues too, which is increasingly you want this legibility also can be to some degree transparency in organizations and how do you get it written down. We touched a little bit on the like how you get people together in order to do this and how you align them. I was talking with the CEO of a company the other day who said, "Look, I want to do two things. I know that getting people together more often is important for me because we're on such an emotional journey. It's really hard to do it if everybody is continually remote and distributed. But I also need people to do everything in writing." Because the way in which we advance and make everything legible in the organization is through doing this. That calls for massive changes in what you think about the role of workplace to be as well. So I want to get into that because Laura, the new JLL research that came out yesterday, also talked about this in terms of how are people thinking about the impact on their real estate portfolio, on workplace experience, and love you to sort of start there in terms of your thoughts and what you're seeing.
Yeah. One of the things that we started this about a year and a half ago was when we started to look at our own portfolio that used to sit completely in the real estate function. And so they would go and every 6 months look at the portfolio and say what was coming up for renewal, what space. They would look at utilization. We changed that process and we actually added to it people from my team. And we started to look at what are the roles and the functions that sit in that space and utilize it, along with CRE, and then along with finance. And we added finance in that from the perspective of we couldn't add every business leader. And so we asked them to play the role of what is your strategy and your growth agenda? What does that mean from a people implication? And then how is that going to tie back to workplace strategies and where we need work to be going? And then how do we actually, and we've studied every single business line, how do they actually work together in the space that we're using? And then how does that help develop and reshape what we do? We are launching our new office in London, and all of that came to fruition and how we've built out the space and how it will work and who's sitting where and all of the things that you think about with space configuration and utilization.
Are there specifics on that you learned? Like if you think about that London office design, because there's a few questions in the Q&A around like, how are you thinking about the design of the office experience itself? When you think about like the combination of like people aren't in every day, but also AI is changing the nature of how much time people are spending in various modes, right? Heads down versus together time, and how much of it is in ideation versus is in just like the usual checkbox meetings. So, were there design elements of that that you guys changed, and what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of what was interesting with one of the studies that we did was we had kind of gone through this whole like everyone was like everything's going to be open space, there's going to be very few offices, and then you saw it sort of creep back. You need more team rooms and all of that. But we found in one of the studies that actually we needed more heads down space and people did need more offices. And so in one of the build outs, this didn't happen so much in London, but in one of our office build outs, we said we're actually going to increase the number of offices because the way in which those individuals work, they needed headspace or they needed to bring an analyst and it was just the two of them. And so that would be an example of something that we've learned with some of the study. For the London office, it was a lot about the configuration of as we try to drive one JLL, so better integration across our lines, what was the flow of how we were stacking the staffing in order to drive that in a different way.
Ian, you guys have you've been on a journey at an Airbnb in terms of thinking about what the role of the office is and how you get people together, but also much broader than the office itself in terms of experience. You can give it a sense of what you guys have been up to and what you saw that worked and maybe what
I
didn't.
mean, Airbnb is famous for the live and work anywhere approach to how we support our employees to be able to work remotely. But the reality is that we're certainly not the smartest people in the field here. We learn from a lot of our colleagues and collaborators around this. We used to run these things called in-person weeks. So it's about defining the operating cadence, the operating rhythm of the enterprise. And if we're gonna say to people, we want you to be in person, the question then becomes like, well, for when, with whom, to do what? And if you leave that to chance, right, you just get chaos.
Yeah.
And no one's happy because everyone comes in on a Tuesday morning, they don't see anybody, they're on Zoom calls all day, so the value of being in the office doesn't make sense. And so two things we did. One thing we certainly saw the same thing that Laura's talking about. The office was moving from pre-pandemic office conference rooms and desk space to post-pandemic team rooms and heads down space. And like actually, weirdly enough, the formats were just different enough that we needed to do fairly significant redesign, right? And so the working modes we saw pre-pandemic to post-pandemic were definitely different, and we needed to design the space to support our teams appropriately. Second thing though was this operating rhythm idea of
Yeah.
being really clear that there is going to be guidance from HQ or from the center or from the top or from the leadership on when we come together to do what things. Now, what we did is we decided that every month we were going to actually, we did about 10 of them a year rather than 12 a year. There would be a 10-poll week where we brought our top leaders together to 888 in San Francisco. And then we actually orchestrated the 5 days like a mini conference of like, these are the activities, these are the design reviews, this is the work that will happen, so that our leaders could decide who to invite and make sure that they would all get the best use of their time when together. And you created this moment of like the organization breathing monthly. The thing that we added onto that this year, just before I left, was the idea of, okay, let's get back out into market as well, in the same way that Laura's going to China, right, once or twice a year, get our executive team to do these in-person weeks in the market, so we're understanding the customer problems as closely to the customer problems as possible. So those two things together, I think you can't just, you need to absorb the complexity of a hybrid working schedule to give your employees enough clarity about when to come to work with whom on what. And we've got to acknowledge that the formats are certainly changing on the spaces that we're designing to support people.
Yeah. The Ian and Debbie know this super well, and Laura does too. The let a thousand flowers bloom, every employee chooses their own adventure just leads to a fair amount of collaboration tax and chaos on people. You need a framework and some way of doing it.
Yeah.
Debbie, what are you seeing in terms of both what's been successful in that space, but maybe also like why you just described a really excellent example. You got a 2,200, 2,300 groups of partners from around the globe. You're bringing them together, but you're also bringing junior people in with them. That sounds like exactly the kind of experience that you're trying to
Yeah.
generate.
Yeah. And I mean, I love, Ian, what you described. Um, I get so frustrated, and Brian, you know this, that we're still talking about this return to office thing 6 years later. Like the
Yep.
answer is super, super clear. And it's what you guys are describing. It's you need to be thoughtful about designing the what, where, when, and how of the work, not just how AI integrates into it, but what happens when, where, and how with whom. And the data, I did research 4 years ago almost at this point and put it out. The data is crystal clear for office workers, which by the way is only 40% of the US workforce. 60% this conversation is irrelevant to because they're in factories and retail stores and driving trucks, et cetera. Automation, we'll have another call about that in 5 years. But the answer is crystal clear for office workers. There are certain types of work that it's better to be together, and there's certain types of work that it's better to be apart and have heads down think time. We also know that when we solve for work, we have to solve for your day-to-day work, which is what does your team need to be effective, right? And that's probably 80% of it, but 20% we need to solve for what does the organization need to be effective,
Yes.
which are the soft ties, which is your coming together 1 or 10 times a year, Iain, where you know where everyone is. And so you could create those weak ties as opposed to the strong ties, which got stronger during COVID with the team. So like people need to get all of that. There are two more things they need to get. One is not everyone works the best every way. So for example, your introverts, even stuff that technically you should be together for, they don't do well together, right? Like you could get the best. So if you have a team of lots of introverts, you're going to adjust your model because your goal as a leader is to get the most out of your team, right? So that they could bring their best to their work every day, which gets to the last point, which people are not doing nearly enough, is building the muscle of every leader to be able to decide when do we need to be together and when do we need to be apart. When we are distributed, how do I build intimacy and connection and build bridges to other teams? And that's why a lot of managers and middle managers are saying, I just want an edict from up top. Just tell me what I need to do, because they don't have the confidence or the skills to do it right. So everyone deciding for themselves is chaos.
Yes.
Everyone asking for it to come for the top is ineffective tyranny. Okay.
Yeah. Agreed.
And so you need the muscle building in the middle that no one's doing. And guess what? Some people are really good at it naturally, like naturally knowing when to get people together and be able to justify it. When you make them come in, you earn the commute and you do things that are worthwhile. When they're distributed, you know how to form community and all that stuff. But we need to take those innate skills and copy and paste them purposely into everyone else. And that upskilling at the systematic company-wide level is just not happening.
I would say there's a bunch of research on this that shows that companies that have actually figured out good flexible work practices, not necessarily fully remote, but like how do you actually do exactly what Debbie's describing, which is leaders understanding the needs of their teams. Therefore, how am I going to redesign the office as well as the purpose of coming together? Turns out they actually end up being pretty good at AI deployment also, because you're basically doing the same thing. You're thinking about the design of work itself and the sort of product-centric side of things.
Yeah.
Laura, any other thoughts? There's a question here too, just about like workplace design itself and what it drives engagement as opposed to productivity.
Yeah, we actually we did for the first time last year combined our people survey and real estate survey together to try to get at the validation of how the work is how your space is configured and what does that do to engagement. It was probably too early for us, so the findings were a little bit mixed. We'll repeat it again this year and see. But I think it goes back to a lot of what Debbie was saying is for me, what's happening now, especially in our space, is this whole concept of what we've been talking about is how do you design the work for the future? So not all the technology is up and ready. You have to process or redesign and re-engineer the way work is done. You have offshore and onshore resources that you need to balance, and then the technology into it. And I think space just becomes a component around how do you configure around that. So you're almost bringing so many more. I mean, you've talked for years about the need for HR technology and real estate to come into play. I still think that's probably a huge and probably even more relevant than it ever has been in the past.
Yeah, yeah, spot on. Let's change it up a little bit. I actually got a question or two from the audience that I want to make sure that we get to as well, and then I'll come back to one or two of mine. We talked about early career employees. Anybody want to speak to the perspective on late career employees, those with practical and situational experience, and how what they should be doing these days?
Happy to
Go for it.
upskill yourself on how to reinvent your own workflow. Go crazy, stumble, fail, talk about it with your team, get the reverse mentors that Iain talked about, and just try and get rid of all your muscle memory and lean in and be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Laura, you and I talked about this a little bit in the prep call. I remember you actually had a perspective too on leaders' role in sort of driving AI adoption through demonstration, if I remember right.
We did something similar to what Debbie did. We had our top 150 leaders, and you had to do a self-assessment of where you were at in your AI journey, whether you felt like you were an expert or beginner or in the middle. And then we did training divided around that way as well. I think that, Iain, it was your comment that was interesting about having to document so much more to help enable AI. And I think that I took that, I wrote that down when you said that, because I think that's probably a good message to give those of us later in our careers, that we do have an accountability to help share the knowledge and experience that we have, probably in a different way than we've done before.
Ian, what have you seen work when you push that? Meaning when you push on that lever of I need people to document more to make transparent the workings of the organization. Where do people stumble on that?
Less where to, I mean, it's an emotional thing, right? I think about my prior head of organizational design at Airbnb. And one of the things he did very clearly was he built a bunch of skills that were how he would solve problems and made them available to everybody. And basically made people be able to access him and his knowledge and his skill and capability without him being in the room. That takes a certain sensibility to say, I can do higher value things, right? And I'm going to scale myself using this technology into new ways. Now, that's really valuable for sure. One of the things we began to play with, though, was as a leadership team beginning to document things in Markdown files, right? Like Markdown being a more universally like readable, machine readable format that actually makes it easier for AI to pass our knowledge as leaders. So we're moving away from PDFs being the tyranny of intelligence to Google Docs to Markdown files being a linear generate. But I think Markdown files is going to be a band-aid for something else that will come beyond that as well. I don't think there's a simple answer beyond what Debbie and Laura are sharing, but I think what's fascinating to me is seeing this trend that you're seeing right now in the frontier labs, where you've got so many CTOs, right, who are like running like their engineering organizations of multi-billion-dollar organizations going back to become individual contributors. And the thing that I take out of that for people later stage in their career is focus more on the challenge and less on the role and the title. Like focus more on the work, right? Like think about it as a project. Think about how your skills apply to that thing and what you can learn from that thing. Doesn't matter if you're 55 or 45 or 35. Like what is that going to teach you and what can you bring to it?
I will share as a late 50s former senior executive who's led teams of up to 5,000 at Google. I am much happier in my career when it's changing every few years and I'm learning. I have 3 times moved from like the bigger thing to the smaller thing, and it got easier over time as I did it. But each time I learned something new and it got easier the next time around. And I'm having more fun now than I've ever had. My wife laughs about it, but she's like, "You're having more fun working when you're, not needing to work than you ever have." So, my advice to people as they advance is keep that learning mindset going as fast and far and long as you possibly can.
But I think you're an exception, Brian. I always think you're exceptional. But what you guys are talking about is very, very hard for human nature to do. Like
Yeah.
writing down my expertise, then all of a sudden I'm not critical.
Yeah.
Where's my self-worth,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? Losing mastery and ego, and like it just goes against how we're wired. And we
Yeah.
need to acknowledge that and change the culture to actually celebrate
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot.
I mean, this reminds me, Deborah, you're completely right. And it's a reason why when you think about the learning journey of like learning fluency, mastery at IDEO, when we thought about people building skills, we added a fourth stage, which was teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like actually mastery is not enough. Right, mastery says that you've reached the kind of like the high point of understanding a topic. You need to be able to share that knowledge with others, and that was your ability to advance. Was actually showing that you're able to go from being a master of something to being a teacher of others. And I think that we just need more of that. And it was a weird little thing we did at IDEA, but I think we need to do more of that across the enterprise more broadly.
I love it.
The challenge here is a need for empathy, right? The challenge here is leadership. The last couple of years, empathy has become almost a bad word in some places, right? The sort of tough talking leader has taken over the headlines when if you're going to actually guide and lead people through change, you need a fair amount of empathy to get them through it. But you also need to be able to point, as each of you have done, towards there's something bigger for you on the other side of this, right? So going all the way back, Laura, to the beginning with you, the recruiters that saw their jobs changing, you also pointed to opportunities for them to take on more meaningful, higher value, and higher reward tasks. I've seen that done a bunch of different places. Ian's example of like getting people to write in Markdown, that is hard. But I've also seen people. By the way, subscribe to Charter. It's really good. I've got a newsletter popping tomorrow off of an interview with Helen Cupp, who a couple of you know was a co-author on my book. But she now runs a group called Women Defining AI and talks about skills mastery and
Yeah.
helps close the gender gap. But one of the things that she talks about is a skill, a markdown of a skill itself is something that a champion can build that actually advances a team much more rapidly. The easiest one that she did with this Charter Forum group that I had was a skill around kill AI tropes, meaning if your writing suffers from way too many AI isms in it, it's not this, it's that. It basically goes in and knocks all that stuff out. That's super valuable, right? And then what you do is you celebrate the humans who did that and you turn them into champions in your organization and you reward them for doing that work that trains other people. So that's a thought or two on that front. Um, I've got another question or two or a dozen coming in here. I'm going to pick one of them up if you guys are okay with it. Looking for best practices on AI adoptions that incorporate digital well-being to employees to prevent stress and digital burnout. Because we've talked about this a bit. There's more in the chat itself. Debbie, AI brain fry happens to be a BCG HBR article and term. What are the best practices that you've seen people put into place to help manage the stress?
Yeah. It really comes down to leadership. Let me pause and just say um, the issue of mental well-being is really real. And we're launching a new piece of research around this to look at it because, everyone like characterizes, Gen X and Gen Y and millennials and now Gen Z as, entitled and overworked and however, and we always say it's a life stage that people will grow out of. Okay. One thing we're seeing differently right now with the sort of 26 and under workers is like markedly different wellness. Like they're failing well-being scores on every dimension. Brian, you and I were on a panel years ago with someone from the Harvard School of Public Health who talked about how this generation that's at risk for brain fry, right? Like, and the well-being, like it's more pronounced in the younger generation. And he attributes it to just the world they grew up in, school shootings, opioids, climate, COVID, parents losing their jobs in 2008 recession, and all of that hyper magnified in social media, right? And so what does that have to do with this whole conversation? Nothing, except that we have to be really, really sensitive to brain fry in general and that stress in general, but always with this younger Gen Z population, because it's so we're launching new research. The way it shows up in AI is actually on the brain fry study. So we went back and looked at the data from the study that you just referenced, and we saw that everyone 26 and under in that population, and there's a statistically significant group, use AI for all the same things everyone else is using it for, but they use it materially less. And then what's driving that are attitudes and this wellness piece.
Yeah.
So where I started this long comment was it comes back to leaders first to be aware of it, to be cognizant of it, to go in there with them, to deal with the social issues, right? And deal with the emotional needs of their employees instead of just the technical work-related needs of their employees. But I think there's a huge thing that we need to unpack. So talk to me in 6 months and hopefully
you'll have more data. Laura or Iain, thoughts on that one?
I'm going to just echo everything Debbie's saying. Like, I think the social contract of employment has radically changed in the last 10 years. What the expectations on the individual, the expectations of the individual of the enterprise have changed, right? Like, it is different and difficult to be working right now. And this added pressure just requires leadership, empathy, and sensitivity to be able to acknowledge that all an organization is a bunch of people collectively trying to achieve a goal together. And you need to center the people in that. And that's why in some regards, I don't even like the term HR, because it takes it away from the fact that all an organization is a bunch of people collectively trying to like go after a goal together. So like it's focused back squarely on the leaders, on leadership.
Spot on. I will say there's a question in the chat about what's your position on using incentives, money, performance, goals, bonuses, whatever, to lead people to use AI, ups and downs. I think that's part of the problem, honestly. I think that's part of the challenge that we're seeing in organizations. I've talked to plenty of people in organizations where it goes as extreme as token maxing, or there's a leaderboard, or there's a thing that there's a tendency there towards people overusing it and going to burnout. It also ties back to why it's really hard to get over the emotional issues, because if you're saying your output individually is what matters most, then you're keying it up and driving people a little
Things
mad.
we're watching out for is also the inequity that it creates. So whether or not people are not inherently adopting it on their own, or whether because of the cost of implementing it across a large organization is prohibitive. And so we're actually staging how we actually roll out Claude for our employees, but you're giving the people who get it first a huge advantage. And so one of the things we're trying to be mindful of is how do you create the equity? Not so much through incentives, but it will feed into how you evaluate their performance.
Excellent. Okay, folks, one last question from me. In 30 seconds or less, what's one thing that you would advise leaders to do differently come Monday?
I'll go if no one else will. Okay, I mean,
Do it.
I mean, I've said this. I've been very vocal about saying this. In this moment of change, I'm channeling the Eameses, the kind of classic design couple, that you cannot delegate that understanding, which is a principle that they used in their design practice back in the 60s. And it never has been more important than today for leaders to be deeply involved in the work, to deeply understand what's possible, and to deeply understand the implications of it. Like, you cannot delegate this transformation to middle management or to your directs. You need to be able to turn up, show your receipts, show what you've built, show what you've reinvented. You have to lead from the front, right? By actually building.
Great answer.
I would just build on that and saying for me, so maybe it's not do differently, but don't forget it's all about the people. And we've talked about that a lot, showing empathy, really. And I thought what you said was really smart about role modeling, but also getting in deep and engaging your employees.
And I'd just add plus 1,000 on both of those. Think about your employees' emotional needs.
Mm-hmm.
The emotional needs trump the functional needs. I see it every piece of research I do. And then if you want to know how to help their emotional needs, pre-order the book. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you all so much. This has been really excellent. I just dropped links to JLL's recent research and Debbie's book, 40% off, into the chat. Iain, Laura, Debbie, thank you so much. This has been really amazing. For all of you watching, thank you for joining us. If you have friends who you think would benefit from this, we'll be posting this live on Charter in the next 24 to 48 hours. Please share it out with your friends. Thanks all and have a wonderful Wednesday.